Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon. Do you like anime? I like anime. What started as the thing my dad referred to as that stuff you're not allowed to watch in this house has grown into an industry with an enormous amount of influence in the West. Like nowadays, famous people talk about anime they like. That would have been unheard of back when I was sneaking VHS copies of Evangelion up to my room to watch in the dead of night. So yeah, I was definitely ahead of the trend, as I'm guessing a lot of you were too. But speaking of trends, anime has done more than just entertain us. It's also heavily influenced video games, and in particular, JRPGs. One of the JRPG series that I think you could argue has been most influenced by anime is the Trails series, right? You all know that, yeah? I've been accused of hating anime tropes in the past on this channel, but really nothing could be further from the truth. I like Trails so much because of how anime it is, not in spite of it. And that brings me to what I want to talk about today. See, if Trails was so heavily inspired by anime, isn't it odd that Trails itself has had so little representation in the anime world? I mean, it's had some representation, but neither of those entries are exactly what I would call optimal, right? I think Trails could use a brand new start in anime, and with the upcoming release of the Trails in the Sky remake, now would be a perfect time for Falcom to give us a full-on retelling of the story in the form that inspired it in the first place. We should talk about where Trails has been in the anime realm before we fully dive into where I think it should go. If you're a casual Trails fan, you might not even be aware that there have been two separate anime entries in the Trails series. Oh, to be so blissful, so beautifully ignorant. It's a blessing. You're blessed. But anyway, the first release was an inexplicable anime OVA adaptation of Trails in the Sky, the second chapter. Yeah, that's right. The first Trails anime was an adaptation of the second chapter. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Let's start the story in the middle. That won't be a problem for anyone. People who aren't intimately familiar with this story will definitely want to watch this. No, obviously, it wasn't a great idea. But me, being the Trails fan that I am, you can imagine that I was pretty excited to get to see all my favorite characters done up in full anime style. And I was, for like 10 seconds. And then they started talking. To be fair, I've heard most of these actors in other shows, and they're not bad, but the production here is just nobody's best work. In terms of character interpretations, I actually kinda like Brittany Karbowski's Estelle, but the writing doesn't really let her soar. And honestly, the writing I think is the biggest culprit. There are a couple of reasons for that. One that only matters to fans, and another one that's a bit broader. For the broader problem, it's just stilted. It feels like a second draft. One draft beyond the rough translation step that still needed at least one more pass. At one point, Estelle utters the line, "It's understood," in response to an order from Agate.
Sorry, Agate. Has it been that long?
Professor Russell's finally done talking. So now we're going back to the guild and leaving for Elmo Village right after.
It's understood.
And I feel like that may be the first time a person has said those words in that order in the history of the English language. There's a lot of situations like that. Like the writers are communicating the information accurately, but not well, if that makes sense. The other problem that's more apparent to fans is the alternate naming conventions. Now, at first, I thought this anime came out before the English release of Trails in the Sky FC, but that doesn't appear to be the case. It came out in Japan at the end of 2011, and Sky FC apparently released here in the West on PSP in early 2011. Now, of course, Trails wasn't some big thing over here yet, so you could argue both the PSP game and the anime both had a claim to stake as the prime version of Trails in the West. But the translation choices are odd and sort of inconsistent, not within the terms themselves, but in ideology. Let me explain. For example, Chloe's name in the anime is Close. That actually makes sense because her name in Japanese has always been Kurose, but Joshua's name in Japanese is Yoshua. And yet he's not called that here. In fact, he's called something far worse and more sinister. The characters almost all refer to him as Josh. Josh. Nothing against the Joshes of the world, but Josh as a name does not suit the brooding anti-hero with a dark past sort of character that Joshua is. But anyway, My point is, they went with close to match the Japanese, but Josh, which is a goofy rendition of what he's called in the English version of the game. The only change I actually prefer is the title of the song that Josh plays on his harmonica. In the English translation of the original game, it's called The Whereabouts of Light. To me, that's never felt like a great song title. It's weirdly passive. I always wished it had been called Where the Light Is. Well, here in this OVA, they call it Where the Stars Are, which is pretty close to what I wanted, so I give them props for that at least. Also, they call Walter the Dire Wolf Walter the Lanky Wolf, so you know what? I take it back. The dub is actually great. But when it comes to inconsistencies between releases in a franchise, we've definitely seen this sort of thing before when multiple companies are involved. Terminology gets messed up because some localizers tend to not respect the existence of a Western canon for a particular property. Consistency is important across titles, and the oddities of the script on this one make it a bit hard to watch. What is not hard to watch is the animation, because I'll say it's actually very strong. That's to be expected, I guess, since it's an OVA. There's only 2 episodes, so they're really able to go at it. The fight scenes are really cool, and if they had cut out the story bits and just had a series of big fights between the heroes and Ouroboros, I think I would have been fine with that. The big reason for that is the pacing is terrible. Like I said, they're starting with the 2nd chapter, which means the entire setup is completely missing. And not only that, they're cramming a 40+ hour game into 2 half-hour OVA episodes. It's not going to go well, obviously. I mean, sure, they're not telling the whole story, but I guess my question is, what's the point? This was kind of pretty much an entire disaster. I just don't know who this was for. I mean, I'm sure the Japanese audience didn't have as many beefs with it as I do, and if you play the games and watch the anime subtitled, it might not bring you as much pain as it does me. But for those of us who play and watch in English, it's just a really tough watch. But even setting those things aside, it's an anime adaptation of the second part of a story with an enormous amount of foundation left to a tiny number of flashback scenes. There was an opportunity here to create an entry point to the series that could bring in new fans. If they saw an anime that told the story fully and beautifully, they might be inclined to pick up the games, and then the rest of the games to see how the story continues. Or at the very least, if they'd adapted the first part of the story, that could also have motivated people to dive into the games to see more. By making an adaptation like this, they're pretty much guaranteeing their total audience size will be some fraction of the pre-existing Trails fanbase. That's fine, I guess, you can absolutely do that, but it's a huge waste of potential. Now, that's not to say there's nothing in here I liked. Honestly, just seeing some of these iconic scenes and locations done up like this was pretty cool. It really made me hungry for something more, though. So at best, it's an appetizer with a weird aftertaste. What we got next, though, is something else entirely. I personally had a lot of hype going into this show. To me, at the time, this seemed like the perfect way to use anime alongside the main Trails games. After all, every game in the series hints at a much larger world outside of the areas where the main action is taking place. What better way to explore some of those stories than in the medium of anime? And you know what? I still feel that way. I don't consider Trails of Cold Steel: The Northern War to be an atrocity like so many in the fandom do. It's not moving the overall plot forward. It's not revealing anything super amazing about the heroes or villains of the main story. It's not even technically a story we needed to hear in order to get context for the main games. But it's an interesting plot with some pretty cool characters, and it does provide a window into some bits of the world of Zemuria that we just haven't seen. It follows a girl named Lavian, who's part of the Northern Jaegers in Northumbria. If you've been paying attention to the games, you'll recognize the place as where the Northern War occurs in between Trails of Cold Steel 2 and 3, and you'll recognize the Northern Jaegers as a freelance paramilitary organization that a pretty important major character in Cold Steel was once a part of. Lavian is put with a small team and asked to infiltrate Erebonia to scout out information on Rien Schwarzer. This is in the early days prior to the war breaking out, when the government of Northumbria is starting to hear whispers of some really strong dude in a giant robot who might be able to wipe them out. The premise allows the characters to visit some familiar places from the games, and it means we'll get to see some familiar faces too. Most of those familiar faces are even voiced by their voice actors from the games. However, Rien and Altina are not, along with a few others, I think, maybe Million? I'm not positive. And that's always been odd to me. I know they were supposed to have the original actors at one point, but then all of a sudden they backed out and everything seemed very hush-hush and mysterious. If anyone knows what happened there, let me know in the comments, please. I'm very curious. But the writing is good, and the localizers clearly had the right idea, sticking to the existing English canon for place names and terminology. And the fact that so many of the game's actors reprise their roles also shows me that the production did care about getting it right. The fact they couldn't get a few of the bigger characters is a bummer, but I do think they were giving it their best effort here. Anyway, I do see and agree with some of the criticisms. It's not very well paced, and ultimately the characters' actions don't really matter much. The writers didn't really find a way to make them feel like they contributed in a significant way to the events of the story, which kind of makes a lot of it feel really underwhelming. They're just along for the ride. Also, for some reason, whenever I hear Lavian's name, I can't help but think of a toilet. Is it just me? Anybody else just feel that connection in their bones? It's weird. I don't like it. I guess Lavian lavatory, I guess that's what I'm doing. And I'm not even trying to, but I can't stop doing it. All that being said, I still enjoyed watching it. I love the lore of the Trails world, and getting to see the land of Northumbria and really experience what it's like for those people living there was really cool. For the Salt Pail alone, geez, if you're not familiar, the Salt Pail is this event that happens before the games where this giant pillar of salt just randomly appeared in Northumbria one day, and anyone who came into contact with it turned into salt themselves. It basically ruined the entire country, and there's as of yet no explanation for what happened or why. There have been hints, though, and it's one of those things that I'm really eagerly awaiting an answer for. But yeah, hearing about the Salt Pail incident in like the first or second episode really made me glad that they made a show out of this. It was unlikely the games were ever going to spend much time in that region, so this was a good way of conveying that information. Unfortunately, simply conveying information isn't really what a good TV show is about. It's about telling a compelling story with good characters. And that's why I think Trails needs to start over from scratch. Falcom is hard at work on the Trails in the Sky remakes. Presumably part 1 is finished, and they're definitely well on their way to finishing part 2. Having an anime season queued up and ready to go around the release of each game would be an awesome way to present the story to both a new audience and to give fans of the games a new way of experiencing the story they love so much. Now, I think the argument against this might be, why would you need an anime running concurrently with the games? You can just play the games and get the same story. Which, fair enough, right? And I do think that's true to an extent. But the way a video game story is told is so different from the way a television show story is told. Video games have to adhere to the principle that the player is at least somewhat in control. Pacing kind of gets thrown out the window, at least pacing as compared to something from a more static form of media like film or TV. Sometimes if I want to progress past a certain point in the story, I might have to stop everything and grind for a bit if a particular boss is proving too difficult. Not to mention the game part of the game is just naturally going to take up a huge percentage of the total playtime. An anime adaptation of the story would free up the writers to pace the story in such a way that it remains compelling from start to finish without any of those built-in lags that come with the fact that it's a video game. It also opens the door for non-gamers to enjoy the story of Trails too. If I had $1 for every time I tried in vain to explain some cool thing that happened in Trails to my non-Trails fan wife, I'd have enough money to finance a new Trails anime. By retelling the story in anime form, people that don't have the patience or interest in that kind of game can still enjoy the story and get involved with the discourse just like we are. That's not to say that I think the Trails anime should just be a straight adaptation. I think it would be to Falcom's benefit to put some unique content in both the game and the anime adaptations. This would encourage existing fans to watch the show even though they've already played the games, and it could even encourage on-the-fence show fans to finally try the games themselves. It would also provide a super smooth and relatively fast way to catch up on the story before a new game comes out. Not everybody is a complete and total sicko like me, having played through the whole series like 6 times at this point. That's not healthy. I don't recommend that. But I will do it again, and I think it would just be so nice of Falcom to give me a way to re-experience the story without having to reinvest 7,000 hours. Help me out here, guys, please. Please. I'm trying to think of any downsides, and I'm not really coming up with any. The story and characters in this series are already made for anime. Oftentimes, they feel like they were pulled straight out of an anime to begin with. I think it's absolutely vital that Falcom finally nails the Trails anime formula, and I can't think of a better time to start doing that than now. So what do we gotta do to make this happen? No, seriously, tell me, I'll do it. Just like DM me, Falcom, I promise I won't leave you on red. Let's do this. Anyway, that's all for now. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, would you mind liking and subscribing? Oh, and if you want to hear three trails nerds gush about trails more than we probably should, check out my podcast, the JRPG Pursuit. New episodes every Wednesday. Link is in the description. We talk about more than just trails, but we do talk about trails quite a bit. And if you're open to supporting me and the channel, I have memberships available here now too, if you're interested. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.